I want to welcome everybody to this afternoon. My name is Ray Powers. I'm the president of the Historical Society. A lot of our board members here. We have Andy Dubois. We have Howard King. We have our guest speakers who are dying. We have our prior curator, Father Rainier, back there, which incidentally is our mayor now, Tavares. And everybody else here is important too. So, we're going to start off with a prayer and pledge. So I'm going to let Arthur come up here, Arthur Facton, which is our other board member that I almost messed up with. And then we'll get right into the presentation.
Let us stand. All right, go ahead. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for this great and wonderful country that you live in. We thank you for the freedoms that we enjoy. We thank you for the men and women who fought to keep us free. We come now, Father God, to look at and reflect upon the American Revolution. We thank you for Brother Stewart for being out here to teach us. We interact with us too, Lord. We ask that you will bless him. We do ask for blessings upon all the families that are here today and protection. And we thank you for our president, Roy here, Ray here, Father God, and we ask that you continue to bless him too, and the leadership that provides for us. In the name we pray in Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Take your pick.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Here's the credentials of our guest speaker. Stuart Dunaway is a fifth-generation Floridian. His family moved to Florida in 1858 to participate in the citrus industry. His great-grandfather was one of a handful of people who signed to incorporate a Tompkins to the city. His great-uncle was the fifth sheriff of Orange County. His grandfather was a Volusia County agricultural agent and then became assistant to the chief of police in Orlando. Upon retirement, the Siemens Telecom, Stewart was family relocated to Hillsborough, North Carolina. There he found a small town rich in history that led him to work at the North Carolina State Archives for 15 years, transcribing original records and publishing them as reference books. Upon his retirement from the activity, he left North Carolina to publish 265 volumes spanning 86,000 printed pages. Today, he and his wife, for 38 years, reside in the Villages. During his North Carolina research, he focused on the American Revolution, in which one of his relatives, Paul, fell in love with this effort, focusing on his nice follow the Southern campaign. I don't want to steal anything from Stuart. This is kind of special. Not a lot of this was taught in public schools, so we're really blessed to have somebody that's kind of extra on it. Give us a presentation. Pretty good.
Great. Thank you all for coming out to listen to me talk about one of my favorite topics, and it's going to be about the Southern Campaign. We're going to hit 4 particular questions that I got as I traveled primarily the Carolinas giving this presentation and into Virginia. What is the Southern Campaign and what was the mission? Because it's very focused and it's very insightful. Was it a success? Of course, I think we all know that as Americans. And what happened after it ended? And really, this is going to clarify, and I know I'm being very simplistic to say George Washington fought, the British lost, and we became a free nation. But we're going to get into how the failure of this Southern Campaign ended the Revolutionary War. Well, I'm going to answer one question right off the bat. The Southern Campaign is a British term. Whenever we look at battles or anything that goes on historically, they tend to give them names. Sometimes they're a name a historian gives them, but this is actually a British term. So what is the Southern Campaign? The Southern Campaign was a British program focusing on Southern colonies as being represented through reports and numerous discussions. It was the rebellious leaders who were holding the wonderful citizens of the British hostage. If we could get rid of these horrible, rebellious leaders, then the citizens would join the British from the South and end all this problem of this George Washington character. Now, I want to clarify the term of rebel leader. In all of my years in the state archives transcribing original records, especially with the British, the term rebelling and rebellion is shortened to rebel. Never did the British ever recognize a governor appointed during the Revolution. They would either say Mr. Burke or they would say Rebel Burke, but they would never say Governor Burke because they never ever recognized a rebellion as being valid. So that's where the rebel leader comes from. Now I can take one slide because I'm talking to Floridians, just to talk a second about Florida as the 14th colony. Why wasn't Florida in the fight? Now this map in the background, hopefully you can see this is Apalachicola River, which we know. Here is what's called technically East Florida, capital St. Augustine. And then you can see here it says West Florida, Pensacola. This is Spanish. This is British. So whenever we talk about British Florida, we're talking about British East Florida. It was under British rule from 1763 till the end of the war in 1783. So during the war, this was a British colony run by a man, he was tough as nails. During the war, even during early skirmishes and things going on, such as the Stamp Act, the governor here in Florida, who was a military man, he wasn't a politician, he was just radical about how dare these weak leaders allow a rebellion against the Stamp Act. That's how rough he was. But what's important about to realize in Florida is that when they swapped flags in St. Augustine, you went from all the exodus of the Spaniards to bringing in all the British, because most of the Spaniards left because of Catholicism. So it was a very low, hardly any population, and they tried to get them in as fast as they could. So when we compare it to the other colonies, obviously in the 1600s, they have more time to get it populated. Hardly anybody was in here. And during the rumbles, especially in 1775, a lot of people were trying to make decisions. Am I going to support the crown or am I going to fight? They came to Florida. When I was in the state archives, I had a gentleman write me and said, I have a relative that came to Florida during the Revolution. He lived in North Carolina. Could you do research for me? So I did. This man lives in Winter Park. He says, I'm an 8th generation Floridian. He has a British land grant for what we know as De Leon Springs. Later on, one of the brothers actually owned the entire state land grant that would include all of Daytona Beach. Anyway, so as I went in here, sure enough, 1775, North Carolinians got real ugly about, are you going to join, are you not? And he said, man, God save the king, I love the king, and I love my religion, Anglican, not going to change religions. And so they left and came to Florida. My point here is, when you're in any of the other colonies and you look at your neighbor and say, well, who are you voting for? And I don't mean to put it that way, but he said, are you going to go or are you not? Well, nobody has any real accounts. And one of my expeditions through the state archives was looking for, did we ever know did someone sign a book and say, oh, I'm going to revolt? No, I'm going to, no, there is nothing there. So what happened in Florida was not only were you importing Brits into the state, people who were leaving and made a decision to stay British came here. And more importantly was this single event. When they gave Governor Grant the job to come here, he was given the option to create a political body, which we know as a General Assembly. An option. Why? Basically, there were no counties. I mean, when he stepped foot into town. And so he never created a General Assembly. In North Carolina, the General Assembly told the British governor, out of here. So the General Assembly revolted in North Carolina. There's no General Assembly. The governor was a military man. No, we're not going to do a thing. So since there was no body politic, there were no communications with the other colonies through any communications. So bottom line is, Florida did not rebel and they did not join. On to the program. The Southern Campaign actually begins in New York. Huge Navy ships come down with Army men, horses. Just a tremendous flotilla comes down to attack Charlestown, South Carolina. On board of those ships is General Cornwallis and a 2,800 man army. Is taken off the ship, heads on land into Charlestown, and then the British Navy comes into Charlestown and tells those people, we'll level the town by cannon fire or you can surrender. And there was fighting going on. The end result was Charlestown fell. When Charlestown fell, the British commander, Clinton of New York, he is George Washington's equal, he takes the ships, goes back to New York and tells Cornwallis, inland, go do your thing. Let's free these rebellions. So my discussion is going to be the inland Charlestown movement to Yorktown. Now I highlight these 4 particular events in the war because I spent more detailed time in these particular skirmishes and battles. But what it gave us was great insight, more personable, a lot of details about what were the British thinking, what were the local citizens thinking, what was going on, what was the beat of the street. So history books basically glossed over these. They only hit like 3 battles. We got into the details, and this book is published in the National Park System. So here is Cornwallis's AAA roadmap. Here's Charlestown. He moves inland. And by the way, when the British flotilla went back to New York with Clinton on it, they took over Wilmington. So basically, the British had control of all the seaports from North Carolina down to Georgia. So Cornwallis moves, takes this giant army, 30 wagons, and away he goes. And the very first battle occurs at Camden, South Carolina. General Horatio Gates was put into command by the Continental Congress. This is really unique. It's the first time they ever did it. Congress actually acted without talking to George Washington. And they created a thing called the Southern Army. And the reason they did this was the reports from the fall of Charlestown. So Gates is put in control, sends the army down there, not well prepared, I'll say. And August of 1780, Cornwallis wins this battle completely. People scattered left and right, and the history books say, politely, Gates retires from Camden and landed up in Hillsborough, North Carolina. It was more like he left the battlefield. And there were numerous pension records that did not point out proper activity. George Washington is called into Congress. We need a replacement for Gates. And this is not a historian's criticism of Gates. Congress asked for a tribunal on his actions. They were really upset. And of course, George Washington appoints General Nathaniel Greene to take over the Southern Army in October of 1780. So usually Congress would go to George, ask him who you think should be here. Well, from then on, they asked him. They didn't do it independent of him. Congress doesn't change, does it? So October of 1780, he arrives in Hillsborough a month later. One thing you'll find or you'll learn when you get in 18th century records, things move slowly. It takes a long time to do things. He arrives in Hillsborough and he can't even find the army. Nobody knows where they are. This is horrible. So here we are at Camden, and while the British Army is pretty much parked here, 2 events are going to occur. One's going to be a colonel will take off to a battle, and the second colonel will take off to a battle. I just wanted to give you an idea of their locations, but they will be independent activities, not the main army. And the first one's going to be talked about is Kings Mountain. Kings Mountain, South Carolina, this battle is where my ancestor actually fought. This is not usually included in the Southern campaign because this has nothing to do with George Washington. This has nothing to do with anything. These are mountain hunters, men in the western part of Virginia who were insulted by Patrick Ferguson, which I'm not going to discuss what he said in the letter, insulted them such that they were going to come out and settle a score with him. So this is just sticking a stick in hornet's nest, and these guys came out. Colonel Patrick Ferguson will leave October 80 and get to this mountaintop, which I'll show you pictures of it. 122 regulars, 877 Tories. So for those that don't know, whenever you see British or British regulars or British redcoats, these are foreign fighters. These are real army men. A Tory is basically just a citizen who is supporting the British. He's a militiaman. So as you can see, it was a very small contingent of British officers or British military guys and a bunch of South Carolinians who were supporting the crown. The entire force killed, wounded, POW. Now, to show you the difference, the British accounted 19 dead, 35 wounded, 206 dead, 23 wounded, and the rest were prisoners. So again, you can see the numbers in those who knew and those who were just citizens. 26 over mountain men were killed and wounded, 36 wounded. Now, here's the most radical part about Kings Mountain. They saw during the battle, Patrick Ferguson left his wagon, gets on a horse, and there were 2 camp ladies with him. And this one lady jumped on the back of the horse. The over mountain men saw him galloping off the battle, shot him dead, shot her dead off the horse. You don't shoot leaders in the revolution. You only get a surrender. You only fight for a surrender. You don't kill leaders. This causes tremendous rattling in the British Empire, so to speak. It went all over that these terrorists killed this leader on his exodus. There was a British medical officer who wrote a diary, the whole thing, and he called such terrorism of these people. They hid behind trees and shot at them. How dare they hide behind these trees? Well, where are the over mountain men coming from? Indian territory. They jump out, fire, hide behind, reload, and you reload, you can't get hit. Boy, just think of that, some original thinking. It just absolutely caused a big stir throughout. Congress gets word of it. They go to George Washington. How did you get this done? He goes, I don't know what you're talking about. Nobody knew. Just a bunch of, it's kind of like rednecks came out of the woods and wiped them out. Here's Kings Mountain. It's taller than Mount Dora. So if you've done Mount Dora, you can do Kings Mountain. It's more of a knoll. But what's unique when you go there is it's a very flat top, a long flat top, like a bulldozer, but it's natural. And when they killed them, they buried them. No one ever dug them up. So when the National Park Service took over, they put ground penetrating radar, and there are 2 bodies under the pile of stones. And they now stack them higher, but they're there. So they have a monument for Patrick Ferguson's death. When you go in the reenactment every year, the Over Mountain Trail Association's an organization you can join. They walk this still today from Abingdon, Virginia, through the Virginia mountains, into the North Carolina mountains, into South Carolina, across South Carolina to Kings Mountain. And I drove it and felt, man, this was a long time. And some of these guys still walk it. And so when you go to a reenactment, you can see them. There they are. No uniforms. Here is the monument for Patrick Ferguson's campsite. And again, you can see it's relatively flat. So Cornwallis finally gets word that his right-hand guy, and the inside scoop is Ferguson was his favorite. So he loses this guy. He's now all wound up. Oh my God, these people are acting like terrorists. And contacts New York to say, send me a replacement. This forces Cornwallis to stay put, giving time for General Nathanael Greene to wander down. So you're like, well, how does he have any months to do? It's because of all of this. Word got out, and let me tell you, spies were very active. And spies weren't, like 007. They were citizens that were supporting the crown. And so when they see somebody come by and they go, oh, that's Nathanael Greene, they get on their horse and go and tell the general, oh, yeah, we just saw Greene cross in. I mean, the spy information and the letters captured by Currier that were in the actual letters of Cornwallis are amazing. So spies had already told him Greene had re-entered. He's in Charlotte. And Cornwallis sends out his next colonel, Bannister Tarleton, at a place called Cowpens. January, so we've done the October loss, November, December, January. And here goes Tarleton with a group of men. And they run into Andrew Pickens, Daniel Morgan, William Washington. These are Patriot generals. And Tarleton almost loses his life at this battle. Cornwallis will have words with Tarleton. Tarleton's a young man. He's known to be fiery, perhaps to the point of uncontrollable, yet his diary he published after he went back to London disagrees with that. But what Cornwallis found out was these guys set a trap, and Cornwallis thought he was a little too much immature to be pulled into this trap. He thought he should have known that, and he didn't. From that point on, Cornwallis will never send Tarleton on his own ever again. He always will be near a courier distance. 110 dead Brits, 200 wounded, 12 and 62. This was a win for the Patriots. Reenactment every year. This is a national park. One's on one side of South Carolina, one's on the other. If you go to Kings Mountain, you go right by Cowpens. They preserve them. The 18th century roadbed's still there. The one they marched on, still there. You can walk right down. They know all this stuff is just unbelievably preserved. Living in Orlando and watching Walt Disney alter things, or the villages alter things, you really do get amazed to walk 18th century things in North Carolina or in South Carolina. It just never changed. Now, I want you to pay attention to this gentleman here. This is Bannister Tarleton. These reenactors are serious reenactors. These are original uniforms. And original, I mean they are to the T. They're not polyester costumes. Bearskin hat. This is a cavalry hat. Bearskin on top. Green jacket. Not a red coat. Green jacket. Buff pants. But I'm going to give you a little secret. He has a black collar, black front, and black around his wrist. And so we're going to talk about this later on because somebody's going to look just like him. And of course, the kids love to watch how the British make coleslaw. It's a great time at the park. British General Cornwallis will now leave Camden. He will go get Tarleton. He was so upset with him. They learned that Greene had gathered and they got the prisoners. He wants them back. And so now he moves this massive army. And it's real hard to imagine today when you say 2,500 men and 30-something wagons. But on a little 8-foot wide dirt road or clay roads in North Carolina, it's hard to move these guys. So on the way pursuing Greene, Cornwallis makes a decision. I'm self-sufficient. The baggage wagons are holding me back. I'm going to destroy them all, minus, a couple for his ammo, etc. Took him a day and a half to destroy all this stuff because he didn't want the Patriots to get a hold of it. Now he can speed up and chase Greene. So he continues to chase Greene up to the border. This whole event's called the Race to the Dan. Well, guess what? If we went back in time and asked a neighbor, hey, tell me something about the Race to the Dan, they go, I don't know what you're talking about. This is an example of a battle term or an event that is done by historians. There is no such campaign. Cornwallis is chasing Greene. Greene's on a retreat. He follows the Dan River, which borders Virginia and North Carolina. And he had this surveyed because what Nathanael Greene needed the most was men and supplies out of Virginia into North Carolina. So he had officers early on survey where the ferry boat crossings were. So British are on behind him, chasing right on his tail, and he takes a third of his men on one ferry crossing, keeps the boat on the Virginia side, goes to a second crossing, second group, and the final crossing is at South Boston, Virginia. Here's the river. This is the crossing point. Greene gets across, and the British arrive. Some say it was 30 minutes, some say it was an hour. They were that close behind him. Of course, there's no railroad in the 18th century, but here it is. And so they have monuments here. This river, even though it looks small, he was not going to cross it. There's a book on the Race to the Dan. Here's a ferry boat. They have a wax museum here. It's a beautiful thing to go. So Cornwallis only has one idea to do at this point, and it's to go get his men put back into order. In Cornwallis's daily travel log, for those that are in the military, he calls what he put in there as a forced march, 2 days, 22 miles, 24 miles. So when I look back, and if I were to ever say anything to the Brits, this was a good job. I mean, they went from days behind to literally an hour behind. They burnt themselves out to get here. Because Cornwallis destroyed his baggage wagons, he's no longer self-sufficient. From now on, he will be relying on North Carolinians for food, supplies, for him to keep going. And North Carolina was poor. Total disaster. He hadn't a clue. He will find out. So the next skirmish that occurs is going to be Hart's Mill while they're camped in Hillsborough. Here's Hillsborough. They surveyed it in 1768. It has about 150 residents, soon to inherit 2,500 men coming in and parking the old place. It is the governor's home. And wherever the governor who was appointed, we never voted for our governors in North Carolina during the war. The General Assembly appointed a governor. He lived here. So what a better place to go than to say, from the British perspective, I'm going to go step into the governor. We're going to put the British flag up at the Capitol. But more importantly, it was the District Militia Supply Center. So this is back to your thing. This was the place where all the supplies were distributed to our military. But more importantly, there is so significant of an event called a proclamation. So when Cornwallis arrives in Hillsborough, he raises the royal standard. Raising the royal standard was so emotional for citizens in the town, it caused rumors, and this is how we got into he's reading these letters. Oh my God, the British raised the royal standard. Whoa, it was a big deal. But here was more important. He issued a proclamation. In effect, he was representing the crown. You could say he was legally representing the king. Oh my God, come all ye people, join me in Hillsborough, North Carolina. And remember, what was the campaign about? It's freeing these wonderful, loyal citizens from these horrible leaders. So he does this on the 20th. His first proclamation and the only proclamation. So what does he do? He said, well, I need supplies. So he sends a group of men over. It's no big deal. 19 captured, 7 out of 2,500 is noise. But Cornwallis will recognize that if I just simply move a group of men to the mill to get supplies, they're gone. And again, not a big deal, but it sends a message that Cornwallis will recognize that these loving citizens might not be so loving. Next is going to be, some consider the most controversial battle in the Revolution. Some historians blow this thing totally out of proportion. There were 300 loyalists on the way to answer the proclamation. So there were some, not none, there were some, 300 men, and that's a guess. No one really knows. 300 were supposedly on their way up. They had contacted Cornwallis, and in Cornwallis's letter back to them, he said, let's rendezvous at a location on a plantation, it was the Holt family plantation, away from Hillsborough, and he says, I'm going to send Tarleton to escort you to downtown because it's not safe. So he says, okay, we'll meet you there. Tarleton takes off on a horse with his group of men, come to the Holt plantation. As soon as they leave downtown, there's a gentleman called Light Horse Harry Lee. He wears a green jacket and buff pants, but there's no black on his coat. Cavalry officer, group of cavalrymen, group of militia cavalrymen with him. So they're following behind Tarleton. Tarleton arrives at the rendezvous spot, comes up to the owner and says, well, I'm here for Pyle's men, goes, oh, they haven't arrived. You know, I bet you they stopped at the O'Neill plantation. It's 5 miles down the road. Okay, so he leaves the sergeant behind and he takes off. Light Horse Harry Lee comes into the town, arrests the sergeant, arrests the homeowner, finds out what's going on. Oh, it's a rendezvous for these loyalists. So they start to make a plan. It really took them time to get things, what are we going to do? Are we going to, so he goes, okay, let's leave, takes off, and guess who arrives? Pyle and his men. They see the green jacket and go, oh, Mr. Tarleton, oh, it's what an honor. So as the men are passing each other, the Patriot and the Patriot guys look at the horses next to them, they go, that red rag in their hats means they're with the crown. And they're armed. And so this guy in the back, it's about midway in this line of horses. So they're all just trotting along and going, what in the heck? And the guy behind him goes, yeah, this is crazy. So the guy behind him goes, who are you with? God save the king. And instantly they pull the horse out, whack, dead man. Well, now imagine, we've got a line of horses, those cavalrymen all dove in on those poor loyalists, and 93 dead men. They actually had to take some were so maimed, they took them to a hospital in Wilmington to put them together. Actually, it's a hospital log preserved that named the people who were trying to put them back together, missing fingers and eyes and whatever. So historians say Light Horse Harry Lee, which his real name is Henry Lee, he is the father of Robert E. Lee. Light Horse Harry Lee, they said, dressed up in a costume. He didn't go to Walmart and get a costume, put it on. That's his normal dress. And so the mistake was they thought that was Tarleton, and they all died. Now, local rumor mill is running wild. What message do you think came from this? If you're loyal and you go to the British, you might not come back alive. This was a horrible event, locally. A lot of dead relatives. Your next door neighbor, you go, what happened to Billy? Oh, he's chopped up. So while this is all going on, Cornwallis has a spy, believe it or not, horseback like day and night, comes into Hillsborough. Nathaniel Greene just crossed the Dan River. So he tells Tarleton, sends a courier to Tarleton, stay put, the army's leaving, and we'll catch you on the highway on the way out. So here's Hillsborough. The British move on the highway. They march just so far, and they camp. And of course, next battle's at Claps Mill. Why? Need supplies. Same thing. Sends a group of guys over. They go down to this mill. They look off in the woods, and there's a big Patriot campsite. They see it. They go back. And the difference in this skirmish is the quantity of people. 400 to 600. It was quite a big engagement. The Patriots were outgunned. I don't think the citizens understood what it was like to fight a real military army. The British's ability to lay fire, reload, they do that in ranks, had to feel like full automatic weapons. So the Patriots are like, boom, we're out of here. We know a lot about this. because a gentleman was this is an 18th century document where he drew the map, told the whole story. Everything about it is in original documents in the state archives. Now, to tell you about Greene, Greene did enter the state of North Carolina from Virginia, and here's Hillsborough. But he comes to a location, and I know we're not from North Carolina, but look at this map here, if you can see this, called the High Rock Ford. Look at this, road, another road, another road, another road. It was like a hub and spoke center of the universe. If you wanted to get supplies and men from Virginia to North Carolina, East North Carolina, Central, it didn't matter where, this was the place to camp. And this is where Greene went when they ratted on him. Cornwallis is here, and he's on that highway. Well, my Disney joke comes back. Some things never change in North Carolina. Here it is. Still there. The campground's right here. Not only that, here is the High Rock Ford. A ford is not an automobile. A ford is a low crossing point on a river. And state law required you to grade it in, go into the creek, move the rocks to make it very easily through with a wagon, and on the other side. This is dated 1748. This is here today. And this man that owns this land takes care of it. He comes and grades it. You can't drive it because the trees are in the way. There's the original block wall that I think one of the records had him repairing in 1800. And this guy, and here we are in 21st century, 23rd century with this stuff. Unbelievable, nothing ever touched. So the road, one of the roads comes through, crosses, goes off, it leaves his property, and right in next door to his woods, there's the road. Boom, still going through. All the roads that are on that map are still in the woods. High Rock, this is about 22, 23 feet tall, comes out of the earth, and later on in life, they built a dam for a mill, and they tied into this, but this is where the name came from. So again, we have the British camped at Copp's Mill. This is the highway to Wilmington. Here's the High Rock Ford. Spies said that Greene had finally arrived. And Cornwallis makes a decision to make a U-turn. Now, all of the guys that were on the Patriot side that were spying, they were, General Greene, you got to come down, General. He's on his way to Wilmington. He's leaving. You need to engage. And Greene up here goes, no, let's watch another day and see what he does. Well, thank goodness, because look what happened. Boom, comes right towards him. So the next event's going to be crossing this river at Weitzel's Mill. The difference is this is a mill location, not foraging. So they've got to cross this to get to the High Rock Ford. And this is the Battle of Weitzel's Mill. This was a real difficult battle. A lot of men got wounded, shot in the back. This was just an ugly location. And believe it or not, hopefully you do by now, it's been preserved. I got with the property owner. He let me on his land. I was there on and off for several months, GPSing all the roads. All the roads are still there. The mill ruins are still there. Everything from the 1760s still there. And look at this terrain. As soon as I visited this site, I go, this is not a place to fight because there's one ford crossing and your options on either side is a rock cliff to death or drowning in the mill pond. Just a horrible location. Here's the original roadbed. Now you might be able to see this little gray spot right here? This is the river. So it's a real slow slope in. You cross the river at this one narrow location where the cliffs are gone, and you come up a pretty steep slope. It's about 15 feet up. So if we were on our horse, our rear view mirror, we'd be looking at being shot in our back as the British are firing at us. Still there. So I'm going to show you one battle. This will be my only battle. Here is the modern highway, and I GPS the roadbed. Here it is. Things still there. So the Patriots got this great idea that what we'll do early morning, we'll get ahead of the British to protect, because this road's going to the High Rock Ford. We'll protect and we'll put the more polished, better fighters on the cliffs, and we'll put the militia out front, in front of the ford. And then we'll put 2 ranks, let them fire, retreat, and then we'll give you cover fire from up here. Great plan. Militia comes in, they set them in front of the ford now. This is the key. And they'll get them all set up for the British to arrive. And boy, they arrived. And these guys got to see the 23rd afoot and 33rd afoot, and then the Brigade of Guards, again, had to be like full automatic weapons. Early morning, black powder smoke. Tarleton writes in his diary, I could not control the men to stop them firing because they were shooting into a black smoke. It was just a cloud, couldn't see anything. Militia panicked. 1 rank of fire and we're out of here. And guess what? They couldn't get across the fords. Too many men, too quick, total disaster. Numerous pensions, shot in the back, wounded, shot in the back, shot in the back, shot in the back. 1 man drowned, took his horse right in the mill pond, boom, drowned. They finally get him through. Tarleton said he finally got a hold of the men to stop them firing so we could see what we're shooting at, and then go and pursue a little bit further. Well, there were a couple of Continental groups here which were pretty well trained, and so these guys were able to do cover fire and retreat while they fought these guys off. Tarleton comes up front as usual. Let's go. And instantly, here comes a horse. Cornwallis says, stop. Return. I will not chase Nathaniel Greene again. Tarleton writes in his diary, this is the most ugly thing he ever wrote. He said this was Cornwallis's biggest mistake in the war. We could have won the war because Greene, the spies said the Greene had no men. He's right up the road. We've got these guys on the run, but he was obedient and he turned around according to orders. So again, here's the British Hillsborough, Clapp's Mill, Weitzel's Mill. Off they go to the next biggest thing to get food and supplies, which will become Guilford Courthouse. Well, we know historically Cornwallis was correct. Greene wasn't at the High Rock Ford. Of course, we had 20/20 vision. So here's Weitzel's Mill. Turns out Greene had left the High Rock Ford, come down to this mill to get his men supplies and food, heard the fighting, and went to another campsite that no one knew about. It's kind of his secret camp location. And then he moved over to the High Rock Ford, and guess, lo and behold, everything he's been asking for finally arrived. Virginia men, Eastern North Carolina men. He had his force. Finally, he could go fight the British. So he leaves, and when you read all these guys, when you read their diaries, they do say it was just a feeling, this was it. And it is. This is the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. This is a battlefield park, federal park in North Carolina. They preserved it. I think it was one of the earliest parks ever preserved, like 1810 or something. General George Washington has a thing called Tour of the States when he became president. As President Washington, he came here and pointed out he knew what Greene had did, the mistakes he made. It was just an interesting thing for having the President of the United States come up and see your stuff. It was pretty neat. Now, Guilford Courthouse is written about in a book of my dear friends. It's called Long, Obstinate, and Bloody. We used to call this the term for tax returns. It's written by Dr. Babbitts and a historian from the State Archives, Josh Howard. Every year there's a reenactment. Federal government disallows firearms being discharged in federal parks, so you can't shoot on the federal park, so they move the reenactment outside, and it's just gorgeous to see. I mean, they really do a good job in the reenactment, firing cannons. You get to see a lot of the British uniforms, a lot of flags. If you're military oriented, these are great events to go to. So what they do is, one year they're on the park property and they put the men where they were historically, and then they show them running, but there's no bang, bang, boom, booms. And so then the next year they do actual reenactments. Tarleton and Cornwallis and his ragtag groups will leave finally, get on the road to Wilmington, He leaves with 40% loss. He has flags. He has field pieces. It's almost like a collection. One of his second favorite, Colonel Webster, died from wounds. And it's the only letter that we have in a collection where Cornwallis wrote his father saddened by his decease. Cornwallis was very upset. General Greene, 60% loss. They got wiped out. And they did not pursue the British as they started to meander. Everybody was in their hospitals trying to take care of what they had left. Cornwallis finally arrives April 8th in Wilmington, and never returns again, and then finally heads to Virginia and wanders in Virginia forever. Now we come to one of my favorite parts. When Cornwallis was sitting in Wilmington, he writes a bunch of letters. Now you would assume he would be bragging. I just whipped him. Man, this was good news. This is his letter. Our experience has shown that their numbers, we're talking about, remember the Loyal Citizens, this is the program, their numbers are not so great as had been represented. And their friendship was only passive. So only he knew when he called for the proclamation, they come up and go, yeah, King, oh, yeah, we love the King. Sure, we love the King. HBO at 8? Man, I'm out of here. I ain't got time. No, they didn't want to fight. But this was not the ugly letter. This is the best one. Now, these letters are not taken out of context. This is at Wilmington, not different places. He's writing now to General Phillips. Now, again, boy, you should have been with me. No. The idea of our friends rising in any number totally failed. Look at this, as I expected. Do you think Cornwallis believed in this campaign? Well, you have to say no. He didn't believe it, as I expected. Have anybody ever been in a program in their business and your boss says, well, I think we should do, and you're like, man, it's tough. Now, here comes the real ugly part of the letter. What is our plan, question mark? Now, wait a minute. You're the head dude. What is our plan? Without one, we cannot succeed. And then comes the ugly part. And I assure you that I am quite tired of marching about the country in quest of adventures. Now, the British are polite. They write really well. We would have 4-letter words probably today in this thing. But this marching about the country in quest of adventures was a real sarcastic comment. Marching around in quest of adventures, losing 40% of your men, they're all dying, and you think this is funny? That's what he's saying. I mean, he was really upset. And then I have to ask you a question. What do you think his disposition was in Wilmington while he's sitting there smoldering? Well, the Southern Campaign ends up over Yorktown. Hopefully everybody knows that. This is a picture. It's a famous painting. General Washington. And I don't even remember who the British officer was that provided Cornwallis a sword at the surrender, but Cornwallis wasn't there. We'll talk about that. So I'm not going to go into it. I want to speed up time. So 3,000 men with Washington, 4,000 men with the French march from Rhode Island to Yorktown. That's a fun day. For almost a whole month to get there. Cornwallis is digging in. Battle begins in October. It's just an ugly battle. People dying left and right. French fleet arrives, so now inside the harbor we've got the HMS, we've got the British Navy and the French, and of course, they're enemies from day one. They hate each other. The British Navy made a decision, we're leaving because we aren't going to let those doggone French have a ship. So they split. I'm sure that helped Cornwallis a lot. Battle at the redoubts. These embankments were just slow and deadly. And by the way, this is a national park. You can go see the redoubts. They're still there. Cornwallis surrenders October 17th. And the technical word is Cornwallis did not arrive because he was ill. Now, when you get into an 18th, and thank goodness the State Archives has a number of unabridged dictionaries you can go to. And we have an 18th century unabridged dictionary. And this actually helped me because when we moved from Orlando to North Carolina, one of our neighbors She said, have you met Mr. Smith yet? No. He makes me so ill, I can't stand him. He's just such a nasty man. He makes me ill. And I was like, pardon me? Ill, ill. And I'm thinking of a serpent, like, no, you mean ill. I-L-L. It's a bad disposition. I believe, Stuart Dunaway, personal opinion, this is my first time with giving you my personal opinion, he was ill. Those letters proved it. We've translated ill to sickness. He had a bad disposition. He was upset. He refused to go there. You go take it. That's my opinion. All the PhDs say he was sick, but that's what it is. He was ill. The Southern Campaign's ends as a total failure. Now this is the AAA roadmap that Cornwallis take to his grandkids sitting at the fireplace and go, son, look what I did in the Carolinas. Now you'd think this was it. This is the end of the battle. October was the surrender. November, December, fighting's going full steam ahead. Everything's going on just as normal. They even captured the governor of North Carolina, put him in prison at gunpoint. You all surrendered. January 82, still nothing's going on. Our governor escapes from prison. Oh, wait, CNN, Crown News Network comes on. We've got breaking news. George Germain, Secretary of State, resigns. London was full of political rhetoric. Now, you may not know, but in London, politics were very polarized. And most don't know that General Cornwallis, his name is Lord Charles Cornwallis. It's an elderly gentleman. He's a lord. House of Lords. He had political touches. He's an elderly guy. He had political contacts. So the Supreme Commander goes to the king. He sends his report in. I didn't surrender. He did. Not me. Germain resigns, but that's not it. The Prime Minister of England resigns. The political fervor was just going nuts. Now, you may never ever hear about this because a lot of people will ask questions after you just say Yorktown's the end of it. How did one general surrender in the Revolutionary War? Well, it's because they heard him, they knew him, and the politics was ugly. And so the division in England over should we be fighting our citizens or should we let them be independent? In fact, I think George Germain called, well, those country characters can't do anything. So this is what ended the war. Clinton finally gets a letter, come on back, it's over with. But it took a long time. Finally, a letter came to the guy in charge of Wilmington, and he's told, get out. And it isn't until November that the Treaty of Peace is signed in Paris. But it isn't the one surrender of all the surrenders. It was this one general that got into the politics. So here's the last, I asked, so what happened at the end of the Southern Campaign? Its failure caused a number of these events that led to the end of the Revolutionary War. No, there were not a lot of loyalists. So this idea that there were a ton of loyalists being suppressed by these rebel leaders was not true. And no, the southern colonies and their citizens would rather fight. Now I'm going to end my last slide with this about Nathanael Greene. This is his wife, vivacious. She was ahead of her time. Lot about her. Wonderful lady. She wanted to see her husband. So she comes down in 1782 to South Carolina from Rhode Island, and this is what she said. She was aghast that he could have aged so much in 2 years during the Southern, act 23 months to be technical. Much thinner than she had ever seen him. He appeared considerably older than his 39 years. But this is the interesting part. The merry twinkle in his eye was gone, and his face in repose were the expression of perpetual concern. This man gave all for his country and our country. God bless our patriot citizens. God bless America. Thank you.